I'm not the same person, Tom, she said. I know, he replied. Neither am I. Silence. But maybe, she continued, that's not a bad thing. The words were simple. But they carried possibility. Not certainty. Not resolution. Just possibility. Tom's grip on the phone relaxed slightly. Maybe it's not, he said. A pause. Would you like to start with coffee? She asked. The question was small. But it changed everything. Tom let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. I'd like that. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was light. Okay, she said softly, then let's start there. The call ended. Tom lowered the phone slowly. The room remained still. But something had changed. Not the past. That stayed exactly the same. But the future, that was different now. Because sometimes, closure doesn't come from fixing what was broken. It comes from finally facing it. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do, is not letting fear write the ending. But choosing to begin again. He called her after 25 years, but what she said next froze his entire world. Tom Cruise sat in a silent studio, a hidden letter shaking in his hands, and a voice from the past finally answered the phone. But instead of anger, instead of closure, she whispered something he never expected. And in that exact moment, the man the world thought was fearless, stopped breathing. Because what she said next wasn't forgiveness. It was a question that could destroy everything. For years, Tom Cruise lived with a silence so carefully constructed, it almost felt intentional. Not accidental, not forgotten. Chosen. The world believed they knew him. They saw the man who defied gravity, who ran toward explosions, who smiled in the face of chaos as if fear had never learned his name. They saw control. Precision. Perfection. But what they never saw, was hesitation. Because behind every calculated movement, behind every perfectly timed smile, there was a moment in his life that refused to stay buried. A moment that didn't follow a script. A moment he never corrected. And it had a name. Heather Lane. A name erased from interviews. Removed from conversations. Deleted from history, except one place. His memory. At 63, Tom Cruise had everything the world could offer. Fame that stretched across decades. Respect built on discipline. A legacy few could ever reach. But none of it mattered when the night came. Because when the lights turned off, and silence filled the room, there was always one thing waiting for him. A voice he never answered. That night, Los Angeles felt different. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just distant. Rain traced slow lines down the glass walls of his penthouse, distorting the city lights into something almost unrecognizable. Inside, everything was still. Tom stood alone in a room filled with awards. Golden statues. Framed posters. Proof of a life well lived. But tonight, they felt like distractions. Carefully placed reminders to avoid something else. Something real. He walked slowly toward the far wall. Not the one with awards. The other one. Plain. Unremarkable. Almost invisible, his fingers paused before pressing against it. A soft click. A hidden compartment opened. Inside, there was no spotlight. No fame. No success. Just a small, worn cassette tape. Labeled in faded ink, for Tom, if you ever listen. His hand hovered over it. Not touching. Not yet. Because he already knew what would happen if he did. He would remember. And remembering, was the one thing he had spent 25 years avoiding. I should have answered. He whispered. His voice barely existed. Like even now, he wasn't ready to hear himself say it. The tape wasn't just an object, it was a moment frozen in time. A moment he had walked away from. Back then, everything was different. He wasn't the man the world knew today. He was rising. Climbing. Chasing something bigger than himself. And that's when she appeared. Not dramatically. Not suddenly. But quietly. Like something that wasn't trying to be noticed. Heather. She wasn't part of the spotlight. She didn't chase attention. She didn't belong to the chaos of Hollywood. And maybe that's why he noticed her. At first, it was small. Conversations that lasted longer than they should have. Moments where silence didn't feel empty. Moments where he didn't feel like he had to perform. And then, it became something else. Something undeniable. The connection wasn't loud. It wasn't overwhelming. It was steady. Real, and that scared him more than anything. Because real things could be lost. Tom closed his eyes. The memory came back instantly. A rooftop. Late night. Wind cutting through the silence. She stood there, looking at the city. But when she turned toward him, everything shifted. There was something in her eyes. Not expectation. Not pressure. Just honesty. The kind that doesn't ask for anything, but still changes everything. You don't have to pretend with me, she had said. Simple words. But they stayed. Because for the first time, someone saw through him. Not the actor. Not the image. Him, and that terrified him. Because people like him don't run from danger. They run from vulnerability. The memory twisted in his chest. Even now. Decades later. A sudden vibration broke the silence. His phone. Sharp. Immediate. Unavoidable. He didn't move at first. Because something inside him already knew, this wasn't just a call. This was timing. He picked it up slowly. Yeah. Tom. His manager's voice came through. Careful. Measured. We have a problem. Tom didn't react. What kind of problem? A pause. The kind you can't ignore. Silence stretched between them. There's a journalist, the manager continued. Elena Cross. Tom's expression didn't change. But something inside him shifted. And? Another pause. She has something. Tom's grip tightened slightly. What does she have? The answer came quietly. A recording. Everything stopped. Not physically. But internally. Because there was only one recording that mattered. Only one thing he had spent years making sure never surfaced. Tom turned slowly, looking at the cassette tape still resting in his hand. No. He whispered. Tom, his manager said carefully, she's asking for an interview. A pause, and she knows about Heather. The name hit differently this time. Not like memory. Like consequence. Tom didn't respond immediately. Because this wasn't just about the past anymore. This was about exposure. Truth. The kind you don't control once it's out. What do you want me to do? The manager asked. Tom looked at the tape again. At the words written on it. At the version of himself who chose silence over honesty. For years, he convinced himself that walking away was the right choice. That avoiding the truth protected everything. But now, it didn't feel like protection. It felt like fear. Set it up, Tom said finally. A pause. You're sure? Tom exhaled slowly. No, he said. Then quieter, but I'm done running. And for the first time in 25 years, the past wasn't something behind him anymore. It was waiting for him. The next morning, everything looked normal. The city moved the same way it always did. Cars filled the streets. People rushed through sidewalks. Phones buzzed with notifications that felt urgent, but weren't. The world hadn't changed. But for Tom Cruise, nothing was the same anymore. The drive to the studio felt longer than usual. Not because of distance, but because of what waited at the end of it. Truth. Tom sat quietly in the back seat, his gaze fixed on the window as reflections of the city slid across the glass. Buildings blurred. Lights stretched. Faces disappeared before they could fully exist. And in that distortion, he saw something else. Not the present. The past. Heather's voice. Not clear. Not complete. Just fragments. The way she used to pause before saying something important. The way her words weren't rushed, like she actually meant them. Unlike everything else in his world. "You're not listening again," she had once said. Not angry. Not accusing. Just certain. Tom hadn't responded back then. Because she wasn't wrong. And now, years later, he still hadn't answered. The car slowed. Then stopped. The studio building stood tall in front of him. Clean. Controlled. Professional. But underneath that polished surface, there was tension. Because today wasn't about promotion. It wasn't about a movie. It wasn't about performance. It was about truth. And truth was unpredictable. Tom stepped out. No cameras rushed toward him. No fans gathered. This wasn't public. Not yet. But the silence itself felt louder than noise. Inside, the air was different. Cool. Measured. Every movement precise. Staff members walked quickly, exchanging quiet words that stopped the moment he passed. They knew something. Not everything. But enough. "Mr. Cruise, this way please." A young assistant guided him through a hallway. Long, narrow. Too quiet. Tom nodded politely. The same calm demeanor. The same composed presence. But inside, everything was shifting. As he walked, memories began filling the silence. Not random. Not scattered. Focused. Like they were leading him somewhere. A recording studio. Years ago. Heather sitting behind a microphone. Headphones slightly too big for her ears, she laughed at something small. Something he couldn't even remember now. But the feeling, he remembered that. "You should listen to things all the way through," she had told him. "Not just the parts you're comfortable with." Back in the present. Tom's jaw tightened slightly. Because that's exactly what he had done. He had lived his entire life like that. Listening to the parts that felt safe, ignoring the ones that demanded honesty. "Right here," the assistant said, stopping in front of a door. "Studio A," Tom paused. Just for a second. His hand hovered near the handle. Because once he stepped inside, there was no control left. He pushed the door open. The room was already set, lights positioned. Cameras aligned. Everything precise. Everything ready. Except him. Elena Cross stood near the center. Tablet in hand. Focused. Sharp. The kind of presence that didn't need volume to feel powerful. When she looked up, her expression didn't change much. But her eyes, they registered everything. "Mr. Cruise," she said calmly. "Thank you for coming." Tom walked toward her. Steady. Controlled. He shook her hand. Firm. Professional. But there was something unspoken in that moment. She wasn't greeting him. She was measuring him. "You understand why you're here," she said, Not a question. A statement. Tom nodded once. I do. A slight pause. Then, good. She gestured toward the chair. Let's not waste time. They sat across from each other. Distance carefully measured. Like a line drawn between past and present. Crew members moved quietly. Adjusting lights. Checking audio. Preparing everything. But even they felt it. This wasn't just another interview. Rolling in 5. Tom rested his hands together. Still. But not relaxed. 4. A breath. 3. A memory. 2. A voice. And then, silence. The red light turned on. Elena's entire presence shifted instantly. Professional. Controlled. But sharper now. Good evening, she began, her voice smooth and precise. Today, we sit down with one of the most recognized figures in modern cinema. A brief pause. A man known for control. She turned slightly toward Tom. But behind every controlled life. Another pause. There are moments that were never resolved. Tom didn't react. But his focus sharpened. And today, she continued, we're going to talk about one of those moments. The air tightened. Elena. Tom said calmly, if you have something to ask, ask it. A small smile touched her lips. Not warm. Not friendly. Calculated. Oh, I will, she said. But first. She reached down beside her chair. And pulled something up. A small device. Old. Outdated. Almost forgotten by time. A cassette player. Tom's chest tightened. Barely visible. But real. She placed it gently on the table between them. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Do you recognize this? She asked. Tom's eyes didn't leave it. Because he did. Not just the object. What it carried. Yes, he said quietly. Elena nodded slightly. Then, she pressed play. Static filled the room. Soft at first. Then clearer. Louder. And then, a voice. Tom, if you're hearing this. Everything stopped. Tom's breathing slowed. Not calm. Controlled. Then I guess you never came back. The words landed differently than expected. Not angry. Not emotional. Just, final. I waited. A pause. Small. But devastating. I thought you would. Tom's fingers pressed slightly against each other. But I understand now. Another pause. You were always better at leaving than staying. The room felt heavier. Tom closed his eyes. Not to escape, but because he couldn't watch this happen. I just wish you had told me why. Silence. Then, the tape clicked. And stopped. No music. No dramatic ending. Just, emptiness. Elena didn't speak immediately. Because she didn't need to. The damage was already done. When Tom opened his eyes, something had changed. Not broken. Not lost. But exposed. Would you like to explain that? She asked quietly. And for the first time, Tom Cruise didn't have control over the narrative. Because this wasn't a performance. This was something else. Something real. And what came next would change everything. The silence in the studio didn't fade. It thickened. Not empty, not passive, but heavy. Like something unseen had just entered the room and refused to leave. The tape had stopped. But its echo hadn't. It lingered, in the air, in the walls, inside him. Tom sat still. Too still. His hands rested together, fingers locked tighter than before. A subtle detail. But it said everything. Because for years, he had mastered control. Control over emotion. Control over reaction. Control over pain. But this wasn't something you control. Would you like to explain that? Elena's voice cut through the silence. Soft. Measured. But precise enough to land exactly where it needed to. Tom didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't hear the question, but because for the first time in a long time, he didn't have a prepared answer. His eyes remained on the table. On the cassette player. On the past, finally sitting in front of him. You don't have to say anything, Elena added. A slight pause. But silence is also an answer. That line hit differently. Because silence had always been his answer. A slow breath left his chest. Not steady. Not controlled. Real. You want the truth, he said quietly. Elena didn't interrupt. She just nodded. Because this was the moment. The studio was silent. Not the kind of silence that fades, but the kind that stays. Heavy. Still. Unavoidable. Tom's last words hung in the air, even if it's too late. No one moved. Not Elena. Not the crew. Not even the cameras, though they continued to record every second. Because something had shifted. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a moment. Tom sat there quietly, the letter still in front of him. The tape resting beside it. Two versions of the same truth. One he heard. One he never gave. And now, there was only one thing left. Elena spoke softly. Not as a journalist. As a witness. If it's not too late. She paused. What would you do? The question wasn't sharp. It wasn't a trap. It was real. Tom looked down at his hands. For a moment, he said nothing. Because for 25 years, he had lived without asking that question. What would I do, if I wasn't afraid? A slow breath filled his chest. Then left. I'd call her. The words landed gently, but their impact, immediate. Elena's eyes sharpened slightly. Do you have her number? A pause. Tom nodded once. I never deleted it. The room shifted. Because suddenly, this wasn't about the past anymore. This was happening. Now. Elena hesitated. Just for a second. Then why haven't you called? Tom looked up. And for the first time since the interview began, there was no hesitation in his eyes. Because calling her, he said quietly, means accepting whatever comes next. A pause. And I didn't know if I was ready for that. Silence. But now? Elena asked. Tom glanced at the letter, at the tape. At everything he had carried for decades. And then, he reached into his pocket. The movement was slow. Deliberate. Final. He pulled out his phone. The entire room froze. Because everyone understood, this wasn't symbolic. This was real. Tom looked at the screen. His thumb hovered. Just above it. One name. Still saved. After all these years. Heather. His heartbeat felt louder than anything else. For a moment, time didn't move. Because this was the moment he had avoided his entire life. And now, there was nowhere left to hide. Elena didn't speak. No one did. Because some moments, you don't interrupt. Tom pressed the call button. The sound was small. Barely audible, but it echoed. The phone lifted slowly to his ear. One ring. The room held its breath. 2 rings. Tom's grip tightened slightly. 3 rings. Doubt crept in. Just for a second. Because maybe, it really was too late. 4, click. Everything stopped. A voice. Hello? Soft. Calm. Unfamiliar, and yet completely known. Tom didn't speak immediately. Because for the first time in 25 years, he wasn't remembering her. He was hearing her. Heather. He said quietly. Silence on the other end. Not confusion. Recognition. Tom? His chest tightened. Yeah. A small breath. It's me. A pause. Long, heavy. I didn't think. She started, then stopped. I didn't think you'd ever call. The words weren't angry. They weren't bitter. They were honest. Tom closed his eyes briefly. I know. A pause. I should've, a long time ago. Silence. But it wasn't empty. It was processing. Years, compressed into seconds. I saw the interview, she said quietly. The room shifted again. Because she knew. She had seen everything. I figured, Tom replied softly. Another pause. You finally listened, she added. That line hit deeper than anything else. Tom let out a small breath. Yeah. I'm sorry it took me this long. Silence. And then, a soft exhale from her side. It always did, she said. Not cruel. Not sharp. Just, true. Tom nodded slightly. Even though she couldn't see it. I know I don't deserve anything from you, he said. A pause. But I needed to tell you. His voice steadied. I heard you. Silence. I always did. Another pause. I just didn't know how to answer. The truth settled between them. Not perfect. Not clean. But real. And now? She asked softly. Tom opened his eyes. Looking straight ahead. But seeing something else. Now. He said, I'm not calling to fix the past. A pause. I'm calling to be honest in the present. Silence. And what does that honesty say? She asked. Tom didn't hesitate. That I never stop thinking about you. A breath. That leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. The room didn't move. And that if there's even a small part of you that's willing to talk, his voice softened. I'd like that chance. Silence. Longer this time. Not empty. Important. Then, a small sound. Almost like a quiet laugh. You always did take the long way around, she said. Tom smiled slightly. Yeah. I did. Another pause. But you got here, she added. And in that moment, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not instantly. But enough.